Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Space Force on Netflix. Let's talk about it. So Space Force is a highly anticipated Netflix series that was created by the creators of The Office, as well as Steve Carell. I don't know if you've heard of The Office. It's this tiny little obscure show that barely anyone remembers. So obviously there was a lot of hype going into this series because it had that pedigree of talent attached to it. On top of the very interesting premise of having this highly decorated and celebrated general given the task to lead the Space Force, which is a subunit of the American defense system, I guess. Apparently the American government wants to invest in a space force for whatever reason, which we'll get into later on. But of course chaos ensues because you have the clashing of scientific minds and militant minds plus space, and it's crazy, it's wild, it has the potential to be hilarious, right? In theory. But alas, we are living in a world of reality, and I'm about to talk to you guys about the reality that I faced whilst watching this series. But before we get into that, first of all, take note that this is a spoiler review, so we are going to be spoiling, I guess, what happens in the show. Maybe, I don't know, I always say that it's a spoiler review, but sometimes I don't even go into spoilers. And secondly, before we get into this review, please remember to subscribe to my channel so you can catch new uploads. Without further ado, let's get into it. So first things first, let's dive into some of the aspects that I really enjoyed about this series, because like I said, in theory, on paper, this should be just 10 out of 10 perfection, right? But interestingly enough, that's not what we got. But we did get some good things out of it. Like I said, the talent behind this show was also behind The Office. Now, fun fact about me, my relationship with The Office is complex in that I kind of think that it's overrated. I know what you're gonna say, but look, I tried watching this show for the first time last year, and I watched the first 3 seasons. The US Office, by the way. I still haven't watched the UK one, funnily enough. But overall, the show is very funny. There's no denying it. There are some incredibly hilarious parts in that show, but I stopped watching it after season 3 because it just became so formulaic to me. Like, it was just same old. I wasn't really interested in it, and I think because I have that cushion of being able to go back to it whenever I want to, that it doesn't really feel like a priority to check it out. It's not really a case of me disliking the show, but it's a case of people rating it so highly that they truly believe it's one of the best shows to have ever aired on television. When I finally checked it out, I was left wanting a little bit more. For me personally, when I think of the mock interview sitcoms that I thoroughly enjoyed, the best one that comes to mind for me is Parks and Rec. Parks and Rec to me is just creme de la creme. That is very much right up my alley. When it came to The Office, I very much enjoyed it, but it felt a bit stale over time. But having said that, there's no denying that there is some true talent associated with that show, that very successful show. And so it does make sense that people would expect the tip of the top when it comes to Space Force. And on top of that, you have the excitement surrounding Steve Carell returning to a TV series, a comedy TV series, unlike the morning show from last year that no one cared about. Overall, I would say that he does deliver as the character of Mark. He's doing some really interesting things here with his voice and really trying to distinguish him as a character in his own right, as opposed to the constant comparisons to his character in The Office, whose name I've forgotten, and that just shows you how much of a fan I am of The Office. Michael Scott, that's his name. I remembered. He's definitely trying to distinguish the two characters and trying to give Mark his own personality, which I appreciated and noted. I think the creative choices that he made in the character benefited this whole stereotype of this general who is very strict and stringent in his ways. He follows orders, he does things exactly as he is told to do them. He doesn't quite understand the specifics and the technicalities of the scientific research that is being conducted in the Space Force. That's not really his avenue. But what he is capable of doing is leading the team and leading this division in order to achieve the goals that the government wants them to, or at least at the beginning. And I think the character works best when he's doing that, when he's doing his job and facing the challenges that come along with it on a daily basis. In my opinion, when it comes to this character, things start to go awry, astray, if you will, when we veer off into his social life and his personal life, which I don't find anywhere near as interesting, funny, or compelling. But as much as I very much enjoy Steve Carell's portrayal of Mark, the true star of this show, in my humble opinion, the one that takes the cake, he really makes this show work. I wish I'd watched this show before making my video on MVP TV show characters, because he would definitely be in there. That is John Malkovich's character, Adrian Mallory. I love him. His personality is the personification of my soul. I love all of the interactions that he has with Mark. I, first of all, just in general, love me a frenemy relationship. It's one of my favorite tropes in TV and cinema. And I absolutely love seeing Mark and Adrian's friendship grow as the series went on. I loved how they butted heads in terms of morals and principles, but at the same time, they were able to come together when it truly mattered and to get the job done. And we'll talk about the job later on, but just in terms of that dynamic, loved it. Love to see it. And whilst we're on the subject, let's just give it out for John Malkovich's incredible comedic gold. His deadpan delivery is just, like I said, the personification of my soul. I love that type of comedy, that kind of Jason Bateman in Arrested Development type comedy where the person doesn't seem like they're doing much. It seems so effortless and almost boring to them, but the charisma, it just attracts you as the audience. And I think John Malkovich is a perfect example of that in this series. He really does make the show for me. Another perfect example of this is with Jimmy Yang, who portrays Dr. Chan in this series. He is incredible. I love this character as well. He's a close second to Dr. Mallory. Again, he has a very deadpan delivery and he's very awkward and he's a typical science nerd. I remember really enjoying the actor in Silicon Valley. I think he was great there, but he was used sparingly. Here he has a bit more of a role in this series, and I actually think you could get rid of some of those other side characters and just focus more on him because he's so great. I love the relationship that he builds with Angela Ali, although I do think that she's an inferior character in comparison to him. I wish they'd done a bit more to flesh her out, which again we'll talk about later on. But in terms of their dynamic, I was invested in it, but it was mostly because Dr. Chan was just such an interesting and compelling character. And finally, when it comes to the positive aspects of this series, I would say that the production value is there. Netflix is not skimping out on Space Force because it looks stunning. It looks so cool. I think it creates this beautiful set for this show to exist in because it feels real, but at the same time there's this kind of campiness to it that works so well to kind of edge on that comedic aspect. So I very much appreciated the production value of this series. I think it made it just feel so fresh and clean and exciting, and something that you could really get invested in following the series over many seasons. But alas, it takes more than just production design to get you invested in a TV show, and unfortunately there are a lot of things that are working against this series, and I think it becomes even more of a problem and even more noticeable when you think about how shows like The Office didn't even have the production value that this show does. Like, you can see the money on the screen when it comes to this series, this Netflix series, but with The Office it was just so cheap. It was so simple. It was like a cable network show. It was just like this fake office that they used all the time, and there were a few other sets here and there, but it was a very bleak world, which made sense for thematically for the show. But in terms of the aesthetics, like, it doesn't look grand, it doesn't look fancy, but it works. And why does it work? It's because there's substance. It's not just style. And I think in the case of Space Force, it's definitely style over substance. First of all, we can talk about the storyline itself and how it's very lackluster. It's very bare bones. We have this Space Force that is supposed to be designed to complete this mission in space, something about satellites and protecting individuals somehow. And I think that's my first problem when it comes to the story of the show, is that there's no real focus on the mission and the goal of the mission when it comes to the Space Force itself. Like, I don't really understand their objectives, and maybe it's because they don't either. I mean, you hear Dr. Mallory is doing all kinds of research for whatever the hell he wants. I don't know, helping humanity somehow. And of course, when the leader, Mark, doesn't really understand the scientific discoveries that he's making either, it just becomes even more of a confusion. And you even have that episode where Mark is tasked with explaining to the military complex why it is that he requires this certain amount of money for his budget, but he ends up not being able to because they're like, well, what exactly are you doing? Like, what kind of scientific discoveries are you making in order to benefit the rest of American society? And he's just like, rats? Tap the pencil. Let's go to Dr. Mallory, who can explain it. Oh, he's not helping. Okay. It's very bare bones when it comes to the explanation of why is there. And I think it makes more sense for a show like The Office to not really focus on what it is they're doing at work, because that is like, it's so boring, it's so dull, it's so banal, and that's the whole point. But when you have a show like Space Force, the fact that they're in the Space Force is a huge drawing point, and so the mission objective should be very clear so that we know what they're working towards throughout this season. And it becomes especially problematic at the end of the season when they realize that China has beat them to it, and they've managed to get to the moon before them and started colonizing it, I guess. So they're forced to condense their 4-year plan to get to the moon into about a couple of weeks and rush things together in a hodgepodge manner to just get some people on there and plant an American flag for the sake of it, because the president is tweeting really aggressively and they have to just get it done. And I think that could have worked if we had a sense of the timeline and the time frame throughout the season. It could have worked to kind of speed things up and have this pressure on them, which again could have helped with the comedic aspect of the series. But instead, because we don't quite know the time frame that they're working on to begin with, and we don't quite know the objective that they have to begin with, like, why do they want to go on the moon? Research for what? Like, it's very vague and left very much to the bottom of the pile in terms of priority. But when it becomes a priority at the end of the season, you're like, oh, so now I should be paying attention to what's supposed to be going on. But you just lost at that point because it wasn't really something that they established at the beginning. And the second story element that I wasn't the biggest fan of, as I alluded to earlier, was the social life aspect of the character of Mark. I don't care about his social life. I don't care about his dating life. I don't care about his daughter. So I'm sorry, but I don't care about his daughter. I think she was just such an incompetent cat. So dumb. She was dating the Russian spy who's like 10 years older than her, right? But I could let that slide because she was aware that he was using her. So I could let it slide as just like general rebellious behavior. Whatever. You're a teenage girl, fine. But at the end, in the final episode, when she gets on that truck with the strangers and ends up in the middle of a desert, luckily alive, right? Luckily untouched. Like, that was a miracle. Can we talk about how that was a miracle, that she just came out of that alive and unscathed? Crazy. I just could not understand this character. Imagine doing that for attention. Imagine doing that for attention when your father is a general and is in command of a space force, and you're complaining that he doesn't give you enough attention. Please not now. Please not now. I was so angry with that. Dumb. Ugh. And you're supposed to sympathize with her because her whole life was moved away into the middle of Colorado or something, and she's alone and she doesn't have any friends and she's miserable, and so boo-hoo, like, you're supposed to really care about her. No, I don't care. Her father's job is a matter of life and death. Like, there are some huge stakes here. Like, he isn't just working at a paper company or wherever it was that they were working in the office. He is the commander of the space force. How am I supposed to sympathize with this girl when her father has such an important job? Like, I can't. It's like if he was like a surgeon and she was complaining about, like, oh, but you're not giving me enough time. He's saving lives. Can we just drop this? She was just so annoying, and her actions in the final episode were mind-blowingly stupid. So her father saving her in the final minute made absolutely nothing, because it felt so dumb in the first place that it didn't feel like a victory when she was saved. And speaking of stupid characters, you have Ben Schwartz playing the character of F. Tony, who is dumb. So dumb. Sometimes he has moments of redemption, but for the most part, he's just a walking, talking punchline, which could have worked. Like, that could have been something interesting, especially because obviously there are a lot of themes in this show that explore the American political system. The show is obviously trying to hold a mirror up to the socio-political climate in America right now and trying to give us some very clever commentary on the situation. I don't know how successful it is in its doing so, because a lot of what it's trying to say we've heard before. We've heard it so many times that the joke has kind of become dry. It's kind of run its course. And I think the character of Tony is emblematic of that, because this is the character who should be very interesting. He should be very funny, because, you know, life imitates art, imitates life again. With so much going on in American politics right now, and with him standing in as this PR person caricature who's supposed to be reflecting on a lot of what's going on in the White House, it should feel very funny and topical and on the pulse, but instead it just feels a bit played out. Which brings me to the general comedy of the show overall. I don't think this is a very funny show. Unfortunately, there are nuggets of gold sprinkled in throughout the episodes that really make you see the potential of what this could have been. And of course, a lot of them do involve John Malkovich, who is, again, gold here. But for the most part, a lot of the jokes just fall flat. The series feels like it's conflicted between trying to be super funny, super quirky and young and fresh and hip, but at the same time very reflective and very intellectual in its social commentary, and a bit more of a drama in terms of the aspects of Mark's life that it tries to explore. For example, it tries to explore the mental toll of being in the military for such a long time in the way that Mark has, and perhaps even suggesting towards the exploration of PTSD. But that exploration is just so shallow that it doesn't really do enough to say anything relevant or interesting. But at the same time, the comedy aspect isn't strong either, so it doesn't make for a great comedy. So you're left with these two half-assed elements of this series, and it kind of leaves the whole series overall feeling a bit lacking. When it comes to improving this series for a following season, if they do get more seasons, which I hope that they do, because again, there is that potential there, but I would say that what would make it better immediately is focusing the 10 episodes that it has. 10 episodes is so little, especially considering that shows like The Office and Parks and Rec had so many more episodes per season, and at the same time this series only has like half an hour per episode. It's not even the full hour. So they really needed to focus on the mission at hand and the steps that they needed to take to get to that end goal, so that we are actually working with this team towards something that is clear in sight, as opposed to just floundering around. And yes, there's definitely comedy to be found in seeing Mark flounder around in his new role, but the mission statement should not be as obscure as his job description. We should still have something that is very well defined to ground the whole situation where hijinks can ensue. And if they did this properly, there would be far less time to focus on less important or interesting things like Mark's dating life. The fact that they were trying to rush Mark dating that blonde woman in the first season. Again, you only have 10 episodes. What are you doing establishing a love story already? We don't need that. Just do his job properly and do his relationship with his daughter properly. Don't introduce a love story already. And I didn't even mention Lisa Kudrow, who's off in prison throughout this season. I don't even remember if they mentioned what she did that would earn her 40 years in prison. I need to go back to look that up, because I have no idea what she did. All of a sudden she was just in prison and it made absolutely no sense, but whatever. That was already an interesting angle, although they kind of reversed that because in the end she escapes, so I don't know what's going to happen there. But instead of focusing on him dating this other woman, we didn't need that at all. In fact, we didn't need Dr. Chan pursuing a romantic relationship with Angela in this season anyway. We didn't need that. That felt way too rushed. It was fine with them just being friends, but all of a sudden she needed like plant tutorship. Like it was weird. It was very, very rushed. We didn't need that. Just focus on the Space Force, focus on their mission statement, focus on making that setting funny enough, and then work on branching out, because then we'd be more invested in these characters and we actually care about their personal lives enough to root for them in a romantic setting. Until that's happened, why would we care that Dr. Chan is getting together with Angela? That's the problem. And even though I like the character of Dr. Chan, like, why would I be invested in his relationship when I barely know him? It seems so simple when I say it, right? So overall, whilst I don't think that this series deserved the bashing that it has gotten from critics in the last few days, I do think that it was a bit disappointing considering the talent that we have involved here. It has so much potential, as I keep saying, and I do hope that they do get a second season, because sometimes the first season sucks. Okay, Parks and Rec is a great example of that. I don't think I've even watched the whole of the first season of Parks and Rec because it was not great. But the second season was just mwah, it rose to the occasion. It emerged from the ashes like a phoenix, and it was incredible. And I think this show does have the potential to make that same shift. It just needs to work on focusing on the Space Force, which is what makes it unique to any other show out there, and it's such an interesting premise that it really needs to deliver on. But instead, what we get in season 1 are some very obvious and tired tropes, so we can see the puppeteering in the A, B and C storylines, and there's nothing really innovative in the way that they are conveying the social commentary that they think they're so clever in conveying. And as a result, I'm going to be giving Space Force a 6.5 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Space Force, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this series down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!